So
Oh,
we have a few questions.
one
Um,
right had a good question.
yes, where do the organisms that do the fermentation come from? The cabbage?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
can you see the little bloom on that cabbage? Everything that we need is right here. Nature is pretty amazing. And if it's not on here, it's in the air. So the salt is really just, its job is to protect this organism or this mixture from the bad bacteria. I mean, this is my regular person's description. I'm sure there's a more science description. But, that's all you really need is the cabbage and the salt. You don't need other starter cultures. You don't need anything fancy. That's it.
It's incredible, really, that's floating around. And
There was an interesting paper done where they actually cultured the organisms on people who were sourdough bakers' hands and the influence of the human microflora influencing the fermentation products that they were working on. And so I bet Rebekka has amazing microflora just from all the work that she's doing with different organisms. But yeah, very cool.
So how is it that, we're all being told, wash your hands 8,000 times a day because we don't want the things on our hands anywhere near us. So how is it that those things are good when they're in sauerkraut? How come they don't kill us?
Inevitably, there's been a lot of work in germ theory, and there are so many different pathogens within the environment, but at the same time, soap and water is sufficient. We really don't need to be using antibiotic-based soaps for sanitizing. Obviously, I should preface that with COVID. We should be using good hygiene right now, but going out and we don't necessarily have to hyper sanitize everything that we are eating before we're consuming it.
And at this fermentation festival I went to, somebody asked that, and so, it was Sandor Katz actually said, the fermentation guru said, no one ever dies from eating homemade pickles, and that's a true fact. I always assume someone's going to die from eating home, but they don't. So
now, let me preface that. The wonderful thing about pickling and fermenting is that you get on a bit of a tangent and you get excited about your capabilities. I do highly recommend that people take a look at some validated protocols. I often get questions about home canning, and people will start canning things like beets or corn or green beans, and the potential for botulism is there. Canned foods need to be below pH 4.6 to be safely heat preserved without using high pressure canning processes. And so you have to have the equilibrated pH of that product below pH 4.6. Any acid level above that, into the mid 5 and above, can support the growth of botulism, and botulism can kill you. And so, yes, pickles are likely going to be safe because, again, you've got so much organic acid being produced in that fermentation. But be always cautious and always reach out to the scientific community, reach out to good scientific validated resources before starting to can all sorts of random things.
Right, but the idea is to get that sauerkraut down to a pH of 3, right? So that would
absolutely
okay. So Rebekka's just going to get her other headphones because she's having some trouble hearing. And I wanted to ask her, we have a question. Do you have to use pickling salt for this? I don't think you do.
No, so I'll jump in on that one. Different salts have different other chemicals within it. And so some table salt contains iodine, and that's for nutrition purposes to prevent goiter. And iodine is an inhibitory factor for the growth of many organisms. Other table salts may also include anti-caking agents, and those just add cloudiness to your pickling. So finding a non-iodized salt is ideal for the situation.
And I think Rebekka said she was using sea salt, so that would be perfect. I don't know if
absolutely.
I can see your shoulder, Rebekka, but I don't know if you can hear it. I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, great. So
I'm
Rebekka,
good.
here's a question for you. Is there a tool for measuring the pH? Oh, in canned products. So that somebody's learning how to can. Is there a tool you can measure pH?
Oh, for canning, totally different.
I know, totally different.
But
I
a
can
pH
jump.
meter would do it.
Yeah. So you can buy a pH meter on Amazon, I think. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
pH meters, highly recommend that you get a calibrating solution to go along with it. But pH meters, the price of them is now in the tens. You can get them for like $30, $40. Or you can also get litmus paper. Do make sure that you're getting litmus paper that's for the right pH range. And so you want to be discreetly around that pH 4.6 and always below pH 4.6 before hot water bath canning.
So the question when you were getting your headphones, Rebekka, was about pickling salt. And I said, I think you were using sea salt. Is that correct? Is there any?
Yes. Yeah.
Pickling, you have to buy the special pickling salt.
Any kind of salt is fine as long as it doesn't have anything added to it. So table salt has iodine. You don't want that. It's inhibiting the bacteria that we're trying to encourage. Yeah.
Great. Good. We had questions before in the chat, and I wrote them down. And this is interesting. So this is kind of confusing us, right? We're talking about canning, we're talking about vinegar, we're talking about all these different. So we're obviously confused about what steps or products need to be present for something to be considered fermented. Amy, you want to take that?
Sorry, I just did have someone walk in on me.
Oh,
who just
sorry.
So what technically is fermented? Again, the definition of fermentation is all over the map depending on what science you come from. But in general, it implies that there's been some sort of ethanolic or lactic acid fermentation that's occurred. Remind me of the question again. Pardon me.
Yeah, again, I guess that's it. It's like, what's the thing that makes something fermented versus something that's just preserved, canned, or whatever.
And so fermentation would just imply that there's been some sort of organism and some sort of biochemical conversion of the component that could be spoiled and converted into something that is going to reduce the spoilage on it.
Right. So that canning is not that. Canning, we try to get rid of all the things, right? But
so in canning, we're using time and temperature processes to extend the shelf life. And we're also using an anaerobic environment. So the seal on that can is reducing the oxygen available to the food. And that's going to prevent both oxidation reactions from occurring in the food, as well as the potential for aerobic organisms to grow out in it.
Yeah, so that kind of preserving is super different than fermentation. Fermentation is a very organic kind. I always think it was like a little biodiversity thing, experiment going on, and that's what makes it so interesting, I think, and how it's different every time, right? It depends on which organisms you have in there as to what you get out at the end. So how long after you get your sauerkraut, Rebekka, in your jar, do you you leave it out, and then do you put it in the refrigerator, or what do you do with it?
Yeah, so again, depending on the temperature. So right now we're looking at about 2 weeks for fermenting a sauerkraut that's harvested, cabbage that's harvested recently. That's at about 20 degrees. But it's really done when you say it's done. So you could leave it to get super funky until December if you want, as long as you're checking on it to make sure there's no mold or particles that have fallen into it. But as soon as you think that it's done, you like the texture, you like the flavor, then you're going to take your weights out and put a lid on and then put it in the fridge. And then it can stay in the fridge for quite a long time. Again, depending on your preference. I think because we have an abundance of ferments at our disposal here, I really like to eat fresher ferments. I'm not that interested in the archive of 5-year-old sauerkraut because we're a little spoiled for selection here. But some people really like the really interesting, very funky, unusual older ferments.
So that won't kill you.
Yeah, it should be fine. Yeah.
So You can actually, I mean, the one question is, what happens if we use a tightly sealed lid while fermenting? I think that's probably not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, your friend, the carbon dioxide is going to make itself very known, even without a firmly closed lid. Even with something just like this, you're going to see it bubbling. This is going to rise up more. There'll be pockets of air because that CO2 is pushing everything up. So then after a couple of days, you want to maybe like push it back down again, get the air out, let those gases escape. And then it'll kind of settle down as it's like done its thing. You can really see that transformation over the time of its fermenting activity.
So it's okay to open it up and test it along the way. Like if you have a canning mindset, you're like, well, you don't open it up.
Right.
I mean, that's the whole idea, right? So I think we have to get that out of our mind and say, oh, we can open it up and test it, see if we like it.
Yeah. This is like a relationship. You're cultivating a good environment for this to help you make something that you want. So you're testing it. Same with a sourdough. I mean, a lot of people have pretty strong relationships with their sourdough starters now. There's Amy's right there. Yeah.
So mine, Phoenix. I love mine. So the question, there's a couple questions here, and they're both the same. So you didn't wash your cabbage before you put it in there,
right?
And the question is cleanliness the enemy of fermentation? It sounds like it is.
It depends. We need to be reasonable with cleanliness. You're going to have a clean kitchen. You're going to wash your hands. You're not going to roll your cabbage on the ground, in a public place before you use it. So I would give it a rinse if that happened. But that's why you're taking the outer leaves off. Cabbage is very hardly packed. It's very contained. There's no dirt that's inside the cabbage. So we don't need to worry about that. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get a worm or something. But you're going to just keep your eyes open for those kinds of things. But yeah, you want to set your ferment up for success. So you're not going to have particles or dirt or, you're going to have things clean before you start so that it can do its thing. But that said, it is a pretty robust situation, and it probably could combat, the odd thing here and there.
So there's a question that once you've got the taste profile that you want, how do you stop the fermentation? Do you just
put it in the fridge? Eat it. Just eat it. Yeah. But putting it in the fridge slows down that process. So we're not stopping it completely. Like if you wanted to stop it, you would pasteurize it or cook it. But putting it in the fridge slows it down enough so that you have time to consume it over a period of time.
So somebody's asked any jar materials you don't want to use, and I think you mentioned don't use plastic.
I prefer not to use anything plastic. Yeah.
And
I see one of my students is jumping in and answering in the chat box. Hey, Judy. Honestly, glass is ideal at the household level. In industrial settings, it's challenging because in larger food processing facilities, they can't use glass because of the food safety requirements. And so plastic is common, but it has to be food grade plastic specifically. One challenge is if you're using metal at the household level, many times the organic acids start to corrode metal. And so metal lids in mason jars or Bernardin type jars can start to corrode over time if you store it in the fridge. So you do want to avoid using metal. And again, I would at the household level focus on using glass. Industrial is slightly different.
We ferment in stainless steel here, so we use wine fermenters for our fermentation tanks.
Stainless is going to be passivized so that it does not react with the organic acids. But at the household level, many of the cheap metal bowls and cans that people get at Canadian Tire or the dollar store can start to corrode over time.
Yeah.
So should you put your jars in the dishwasher or like super hot water or? Like again, I'm thinking canning. I know that's different, but
Yeah, you don't need to boil them for 10 minutes. Again, I hesitate about dishwashers because some of them don't sanitize at a super high temperature. We have a sanitizer here, so that's perfect. But what I suggest for home use is just giving it a really good wash, hot soapy water, very well rinsed, and then pour boiling water over the jars, and then just let it sit for a minute or two.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think we can all do that. There are some questions about probiotic values in fermented foods, like let's say sauerkraut. So one is, do the new and the old ferments have the same probiotic values?
I don't know.
So what's really interesting is that the organisms change over time, and you will have senescence of those organisms, and you will have a changing of the flora over time. Now, Health Canada's stance is that it's really hard for food companies to go and make a strong claim against what probiotic health benefits can be made on a food product. So in general, when we go out and advise small companies who are doing fermentations, we say, you know what, it's really implied through a lot of the presence that you have, and through the side communications that you have with the general public. But Health Canada really doesn't allow for specific marketing claims to be made against probiotics. That said, at the household level, I totally encourage people to be consuming them, because again, increasing the diversity of your gut microflora has so many potential net health benefits. So does the probiotic value change over time? Yes, it does. If you are an industrial processor, if you are making a probiotic claim, you have to be able to prove that at the end of your shelf life of your product, the probiotic value that the number of organisms that you're claiming is the same, and they have to be viable organisms. That's the other piece of the puzzle. The bacteria can go into a non-vegetative state, and they can go into spore form, and whether they get activated or not in your gut is something that's still being investigated by science.
Well, this is related question came up. Do stomach acid medications affect probiotics in fermented food?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is interesting, and not directly in the food, but in the ability of your gut to assimilate the organisms. And how do we know this? In the case of infants and their the acidity of their gastrointestinal tract is much less than it is in adults. And it's at that infancy stage that much of the microflora is formed in our guts. So indeed, we know that the acidity and the level of gastric acid that we're producing has a really strong impact on microflora within our guts. So I would assume there is. I'm not a medical doctor. My background's in food science, but we know from nutrition that that's how it should be.
Yeah, interesting. So we have botulism is a big question here. So everybody's concerned about preventing botulism. And how do you know if your fermentation jar has been infected with it?
It won't be.
It won't be, because if you have a really good, vigorous start on that fermentation, and Rebekka was really awesome to show some different hints to show that fermentation is occurring, that you're seeing bubbling occurring, that you are getting a good acidic nose off of that product. Botulism does not like acid. And really, most pH 4.6, which is that magic, as we call it, a critical limit for the growth of botulism, it's not overly acidic. Most fermented fruits and vegetables get into the low 4 into the 3 range, and even lower sometimes on older ferments.
So we're okay. We don't have to worry about botulism. And
botulism also is really, your concern about botulism is mostly for canned vegetables, where you're going straight to chopping, putting in a jar, and thermally processing it.
Low acid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we're okay. We should all go out, cut our cabbages, salt them, see what happens. And I think we need to let you two ladies, do that.
And send us your photos.
Yes.
Here, you can meet my. This is my kimchi.
Does it have a name?
No, he was only made a week ago. My favorite. I have a teenager, and she loves macaroni and cheese, and I always have macaroni and kimchi's.
That's great. I always think we should name all these fermented products because they are on the basis of living organisms. So I would give them a name. So I think
my sourdough is named George.
Mine is Phoenix. What's yours, Rebekka? You must have a sourdough.
I don't actually have a sourdough right now. We have a lot of things to take care of in here. So I think we have plenty at the moment. But when I did have one, its name was Aldo.
Sweet. It is like taking care. It is like having a whole bunch of weird pets that you have to make sure they're happy and fed. Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you both so much. This is really awesome. I think it was a terrific demo and we learned a ton, Amy, and I just want to thank you both for taking the time to do it. And yay, good for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.